Good afternoon, and a very warm welcome to our third Research and Innovation seminar in this year's series, Wellbeing, the Human Face of Productivity. My name is Fiona Lettis and I'm Pro Vice Chancellor for Research and Innovation here at UEA. For those not yet familiar, Productivity East is a new regional hub for engineering, technology and management. Our vision is to work closely with businesses, bringing together our world-class researchers and students from the schools of engineering, computing science, as well as the Norwich Business School to discover practical solutions to current and future challenges, to explore new ideas, develop prototypes and create innovative products and services. We're very grateful for the support that we've had along this journey from the New Anglia LEP, also from the sector groups, NAME, representing the advanced manufacturing and engineering sector in the region, and Tech East, representing the tech sector, digital and tech sector. Although we've been a little bit delayed by COVID and snow and Brexit issues, we are taking possession of the new facility now at the end of June, and we're very much looking forward to that. We'll work over the summer to have it ready for a formal launch and new student arrivals in September. And now we absolutely can't wait to open it properly. Tonight's speaker is Professor Kevin Daniels. Kevin specialises in organisational behaviour here at UEA in the Norwich Business School. His research focuses on workplace practices for health and wellbeing. Kevin led the Work, Learning and Wellbeing Evidence Programme for the Economic and Social Research Council funded What Works Centre for Wellbeing. He now leads on another project also funded by the ESRC Council on workplace wellbeing and productivity. He's published well over 300 scientific papers and reports during his career. He's a member of the British Standards Institute Health and Safety Committee and a member of the British Psychological Society's Division of Occupational Psychology, Health and Wellbeing Group. Kevin chairs the British Psychological Society track at the annual Health and Wellbeing at Work conference at the NEC in Birmingham. Kevin is co-editor of Springer's Handbook series in Occupational Health Services and was editor-in-chief of the European Journal of Work and Organisational Psychology from 2015 to 2019. Kevin is a Fellow of the British Psychological Society and a Fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences. In this evening's talk, Kevin will discuss the factors that link productivity to wellbeing in complex work environments such as advanced manufacturing. And he'll tell us a little bit about some of the policies and practices that organisations can use to help improve productivity and wellbeing. He's happy to take your questions at the end of his presentation. You can either post them in the chat as we go or at the end, or raise your hand and come on to ask a question at the end. So over to you then, Kevin.
So, thank you, Fiona. Very kind introduction, and thank you to everybody for attending on this very, very hot Sunday afternoon. Let's see if I can get the slides up before we start. That should be it. So is that working? Looks like it. So all I need to do now is find where I am. Just hide that and away we go. So if someone could just indicate in the chat for me that you can see the screen okay.
Yes, all good, Kevin.
And I'll kick off. Brilliant. Thank you, Fiona. So as I said, thank you for inviting me and thank you for attending on this very hot afternoon. Just before we kick off, there's something else. We've got an interactive workshop called 99 Ways Return to Work, where we have a couple of industry speakers discussing the new normal, kicking off at 5:15. So Angela's put the link to that event if you'd like to register for that one. We're still open for registration later this afternoon. But I've been asked to talk about productivity and its link with well-being. Before I go, you'll notice a number of logos on the opening slide, as well as UEA. There's a number of other ones. So there's the various acknowledgements. Fiona's mentioned the Economic and Social Research Council grants, which I have to mention. It's contractually I have to mention by grant number, and also we have another project running at the moment which I've been asked to plug, which with the Norwich Good Economy Commission. It's called the Good Jobs Project. My colleague Helen Fitzhugh is running that. If Helen's attending, if you could pop your email into the chat, but she's interested in talking to people, both employers and workers in the Norwich City area about their experiences of work, which we hope to feed into with a bit of work we're doing with the City Council. And there's also a lot of people there, so what I'm going to be talking about today involves a huge team of people across many institutions on these various big projects as well. So a big thanks to all those people that have been involved in this work since 2015, and it's still ongoing. I'd also sort of last plug. There's a bit like Monty Python's Spanish Inquisition, isn't it? The last but one plug. This is for the Propel Hub. So some of the work I'll be talking about today on wellbeing and productivity is part of a larger program of work about people management practices and wellbeing. So if you're interested in following any more up, please do check out the website there. It's designed to be usable by a management and policy audience, so it's not a dry academic website, and you'll find plenty of different resources on there and different ways to look at productivity through enhanced management practices from the 7 universities and the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development that are involved in this initiative. Okay, so one of the things that we're often asked is why workplace wellbeing? Why would you do anything about it? And we got it down to about 4 arguments. 3 of these we've cribbed directly from the Health and Safety Executive, and 1 we've kind of nicked from the Department of Work and Pensions, if you like. The 3 from the Health and Safety Executive are essentially the legal case, the moral case, and the business case, and this underpins their management standards for work-related stress that some of you might be familiar with. The first one, the legal case, and this concerns the prevention of psychiatric damage through working practices. So it's very much focused on preventing ill health. Comes from a landmark ruling in 1994, whereas the case of Walker versus Northumberland County Council, they had successive nervous breakdowns because of the nature of the work and the workload that he was performing, and the judge involved ruled that there was no, up until that point, everyone had assumed that psychiatric damage and psychological damage was not equivalent in law to losing a limb at work because of rotating equipment or stuff like that. And he ruled that there was no distinction in law between psychiatric damage and physical damage, and therefore the 1974 Health and Safety at Work Act applied as much as it did to psychological health as physical health. So that created a new legal imperative in the 1990s to do something about working practices that caused psychological ill health and psychological conditions. So it's not focused as much on well-being as the positive aspects of health, but certainly a minimisation of ill health. The moral case is very much linked to what we call these days corporate social responsibility, and there are some organisations that do include their wellbeing services and offering in their reporting on corporate social responsibility. And there's some evidence that's produced from some of my colleagues in the business school that organisations that include aspects of wellbeing in their CSR actually perform better on the various financial markets than those that do not. And this links to the business case. And I always say this is accumulating, not accumulating evidence. There's so many studies on this, linking well-being, psychological health, positive mood to performance. And I'll come on to some of the mechanisms later, because this is what this presentation's all about. But there is an awful lot of evidence in here. And just to give you one estimation there from our colleagues in the health team at RAND that we work with, they estimated a 13% productivity loss could be avoided if we as a country had better policies and better enactment of those policies around reducing absence and presenteeism due to mental health risk. And many of you will know that presenteeism is turning up to work when sick. That's not always a bad thing, and I'll come on to that a little bit later. But if you can minimise illness, you minimise sickness, absence, and you minimise people not working at full capacity because they're suffering with some kind of health condition. The fourth case is, and this is a social case really. So this is about social value and social responsibility to one's community as an employer. Is basically if you have in this country in particular where the costs of healthcare are basically kicked into the National Health Service rather than being necessarily borne in most cases by health insurance put up by employers, as it is in the United States, for example. You've got, if there are performance deficits, then you're losing corporation tax. If people aren't working and they're retiring early because of sickness, disability, due to mental health conditions, then you're losing income tax. There's the NHS spend, which could have been directed elsewhere. And of course, it limits regional economic development and local economic development as well. So we think there's a very strong social value case, which is why policymakers at all levels of government need to have an interest in looking at workplace wellbeing and how it links to performance and productivity. So I want to kick off by briefly discussing what well-being is and then go into a lot more detail about how it links to performance and productivity. Given this is Productivity East and our focus is on, tends to be on engineering, not necessarily, but tends to be on engineering, then any special consideration for advanced manufacturing or other sectors involving complex systems or continuous improvement processes, I'll point these out as we go along. So what's well-being? So we're going to start with people from my own scientific background. Psychology would tend to define it in a scientific sense as having three major components. So there's a kind of mood aspect, which we label hedonic. So generally this is not feeling anxious and feeling happy. So it's a lot of people think it is limited to basically happiness. But there are other components as well. The summative or subjective component is an assessment of one's life. So this is normally captured by life satisfaction. So are you satisfied with your life as it is? That tends to fluctuate less than anxiety and happiness, which go up and down quite rapidly, of course, as most of us know just by reflecting on our own experiences. So we're talking about an average long run of happiness and anxiety and life satisfaction as well. And then there's the other component which most people miss if they're thinking about well-being, but as we'll see in a second, it is picked up when you ask people about it sometimes, is this notion of what we call eudaimonia. And this boils down to, in a sense, Aristotle's notion of a life worth living. We tend to boil it down to a sense of meaning and purpose in our lives, which can be created by work, of course. But also includes elements of feeling competent in what you're doing, a sense of self-determination, self-control, and having good relationships with people as well. So kind of a relational well-being aspect as well. But essentially, meaning and purpose are the two big ones in that area of eudaimonic well-being. And those aspects are actually used by the Office of National Statistics in their core questions about assessing how we're doing as a nation when it links to well-being. But they have something called a wheel of well-being, which is the wheel you'll see on the left-hand side of your screen as you look at this, and that includes an awful lot of other things that matter to people and that matter to their well-being. So local crime rates, education levels, social capital, and things like that. And that wheel was developed through a heavy consultation, extensive consultation exercise with members of the public about what well-being is. So for members of the public, and we can include workers, business owners, and managers in here, well-being is a little bit more than just those psychological aspects as well. It tends to relate to those things that feed into those psychological aspects. So we tend to find, not surprisingly, people who live in areas with lower crime rates and higher social capital tend to report better well-being. So we did a consultation exercise ourselves way back in 2015, 2016, where we at the time where we were able to travel, and we went to every corner of the United Kingdom and every nation of the United Kingdom to talk to people, essentially talk to anybody that would talk to us, at different industry events and charity events, and through surveys and interviews and focus groups, and just trying to find out what people's own conceptions of workplace wellbeing. So wellbeing as it pertains to the workplace, where you have a link with the psychological definitions and we've just gone through. Yeah, people would say mental health in particular, so that links to anxiety, happiness, and physical health. Mental health more, but physical health as well, and that's important. So that also picks up notions of happiness and life satisfaction. Where it comes down to meaning and purpose, and this is really, I think, really interesting from the perspective of a workplace psychologist, is that people were saying that well-being was very much linked to productive economic activity. That was having a job and doing a good job when you've got that job. So it links to absence, presenteeism, and productivity. So it's like people see doing a productive, performing well at work as an aspect or a feeder into their well-being, which is kind of useful and kind of interesting to bear in mind if you're in a position where you manage people. And the other thing that came across, and this was really surprising to us, so the productive economic activity, that was a nice surprise. What was really surprising to us was this notion that well-being is being part of a community. Workplace well-being is part of a community. Now, we already know that social relationships are a big feeder into our levels of happiness and life satisfaction. But the key here is that actually people saw it as an integral element, not something that feeds into well-being, but an integral element of well-being. So many people who work in my area of research will talk about the happy productive worker thesis. And that's the idea, that the ideal as a worker is to be both happy and productive at work. And we would add to that being a part of a community is that social connection as well. So any management practices that can improve well-being in terms of happiness, life satisfaction, meaning and purpose, but also social connections and productivity are likely the ones that we would consider to be the best interventions. And often these things are very, very closely linked, as we'll see. Okay, so the other reason for looking at well-being, and this is a bit more, in some respects, esoteric, but it relates to the functions of human resource management. So if we take the notion that well-being isn't just about health and absence management, it's a bit more than that, as our consultations indicate. Then what else is it? And one perspective that we're drawing on now is that the notion of employment relations, which is the functional area, or should be the functional area of human resource management, is about looking at employee concerns and trying to balance those so employers get a motivated and productive workforce, but at the same time employees want to work at that particular workplace and not go and work somewhere else. So it's balancing those multiple stakeholder concerns. And the reason why we think well-being is useful in thinking about employment relations is, and we've stolen this idea, we've refined this idea from ideas from the London School of Economics about well-being as a policy metric. And the idea here is that everybody has different levels of well-being. We might have different things that contribute to our well-being, but everyone has different levels of well-being. And our well-being is improved if our concerns are being met. So if we take the idea of a democratic society, if the government is introducing and enacting policies that meet voter concerns, then well-being is likely to go up and then more likely to vote for that government again. So the idea here is that most of us are not that concerned about gross domestic product and other economic indicators unless they actually do contribute to our well-being. So employment rates are important for our well-being, but employment rates are not necessarily the first thing that someone who's retired would think of. So the idea is like well-being applies to those people who are retired, those people who are active in the labour market, those people with health conditions, those people without health conditions. And extending that into the workplace, then you make the argument then, well, if employee concerns are being met about working practices and the kind of working environment then people are in, then well-being should improve. So the metric to look at whether employee concerns are being met and to have that balance around employee concerns for a productive workforce should be around well-being. Now, the good thing here is that worker, manager and scientific conceptions of what well-being is tend to converge. So you can say, well, managers, as our consultation exercise demonstrated, so managers should have a pretty good idea about, what worker concerns are. And these worker concerns, if the right policies are introduced, are actually going to be the ones that the scientific evidence indicates are the ones that are most likely to work. So I have a nice interlocking there, but there are some differences at the margins. So there has to be some negotiation. So what works in one particular workplace might not work as well in another particular workplace. So it might need tailoring or a different approach taken, those kind of things. So there has to be some kind of negotiation around what the different views are about what the correct policies and management practices are. And of course, priorities change. So stakeholders' priorities change. So the process of this negotiation of what to do about well-being, how it balances it against employer interests from productivity is a dynamic and ongoing process. As I'm shortly going to show you, there is no magic bullet, and there's no resting. For those of you who work in safety critical industries or continuous improvement processes, just look at it that way. So safety, you can't take your eye off safety. It is a continuous process, and in advanced manufacturing, continuous improvement is well, you either do it or you go out of business. It's as simple as that. So view it like that as this dynamic, ongoing process. So what works? There's a couple of things I want to say first off. Is that if you think well-being is all about yogurt and Pilates or lycra and lettuce, so it's just focused on health behaviours in the workplace, then you're kind of missing something. There's another thing I came across is well-being donkeys, and I like donkeys, and there are some donkeys just across the field. I don't think a whole workplace well-being programme can just be about well-being donkeys. And there needs to be a bit more. Donkeys are fine, but the big things around those top three here, what we define as job quality, the actual process of management itself, and social relationships at work. I will mention health and wellbeing programs. So these are things directed at physical fitness, health behaviours, smoking, alcohol consumption, and that kind of thing. And the evidence is that they can be effective, especially for preventing physical deterioration. So if you get people exercising more, then they're less likely to develop some conditions related to obesity, and also for improving rehab for people with mental health conditions. That's getting people back into the workplace, and we think this works through establishing workplace cultures where people are more likely to discuss mental health conditions and mental health problems, and therefore get more support when they're returning for work. So health and wellbeing programs can work. Certainly most organisations or large organisations certainly will have access to employee assistance programs. So that's helpful for people who are struggling with mental health problems. But the big three, especially in terms of prevention and to some degree rehabilitation as well, are really the ones that you can have the best health and wellbeing program in the world, but if people have a rubbish manager and they don't like the people they work with and they're doing a boring job, it won't work. It's as simple as that. So those three are the ones to look at. Now, the interesting thing about those three is if you ask workers, and we did, they'd say, well, actually, I want a decent manager. I want to like the people I work with, at least get on with the people I work with and do an interesting job. Funnily enough, they're also the three that are mandated in government guidance of how to enact the 1974 Health and Safety at Work Act in relation to psychological health, and in the new international standard for health and safety at work systems as well. It's around prevention. So what we consider to be in these top three, management is simply about good people management practices. That's being able to communicate, delegate, consult, listen to, and clarify and coach. So it's good people management practices. It's not about shoving different things in a spreadsheet here, then, everywhere. It's about that good core people management practices, which are core to any decent MBA program, of course. Quality work, it's interesting work, it's secure work. People get a chance to develop their skills and use their skills, have some say in how they do their job, as well. Specifically, how they do to their day-to-day activities appears to be, in general, more important, assuming a steady-ish state organisation around that, and a reasonable work-life balance as well. And social relationships are actually the easiest thing in the world to develop at work, because often people want to get on with people at work, and all you've got to do is get people doing shared social activities with a purpose. And these can be things like quality circles, other continuous improvement groups, problem-solving workshops, shared training and development activities. As long as people are doing something together and it's shared, then that will help build bonds between people and develop that as well. Okay, so we just move on to what are the links to productivity. Well, the first thing I've got to say about productivity is there is a step between well-being and productivity, and it's a very important step, and that's called performance. So all well-being can do is improve someone's performance. But if you want to turn that into productivity, that's, if you like, output, then you need decent management practices around that as well. And here we're talking about strategy and marketing and operations. So you get, in advanced manufacturing, get the engineering right. So people's effort and decisions and behaviours get turned into something tangible as an output, either a product or a service that is made at the right price to deliver in sort of private sector terms the kind of profit that you're looking for. So all the other stuff is really important as well. But when it comes to individuals' behaviour, then we tend to talk about performance, and that's the link. So well-being links to performance. And there are two ways in which well-being and performance are interlinked. One way is a causal process, where you have management practices, and these can be health and well-being practices all around how people do their jobs, or how they're managed on a day-to-day basis, improves well-being, which in turn improves performance. So it's kind of domino effect, if you like. It's a causal chain of well-being causes performance, and something else that you do in your organisation causes well-being. And that relates to a number of processes. I'll go into some detail in a second. The other major process is there are things that simultaneously improve well-being and performance without the two necessarily being interlinked. So essentially is good management practices that lead to performance also, as it happens, lead to well-being. And in turn, given other decent operations management and strategy and marketing and the rest, should lead to productivity for the organisation. And these in particular relate to motivation and learning, which I'll come on to. The other thing to say is we all know about the person who's rather grumpy, and it doesn't really matter what you do, that person will not perform well and be grumpy. So these people are outliers as a general rule, so they should not be used as a typical case. What we find in the literature is that you get stronger relationships between management practices, well-being and performance at an organisation or a unit level. So you get accumulating effects, and this is because all these different processes interlink, and what works for one person doesn't necessarily work as well for another person, but because they're interlinked, you get accumulating effects. And some of the processes are social anyway, so that's why you get accumulating effects. And the second point I would like to mention here is that people who are performing well tend to, and it's not on the slide because it's not directly related to the link between well-being, performance and productivity. People who are doing their job well tend to feel better at work. So if people think they're doing a good job and it's valued and it's communicated to them in one way or another, they will tend to feel better at work and their well-being will improve. So there's a nice little mutually reinforcing link there as well. Okay, so one of the routes to in which well-being is linked to better performance is basically prevention of absence, prevention of ill health, and especially around psychological problems, which are in developed economies one of the two biggest reasons for sickness absence. The other one is musculoskeletal problems, and many of the things that link to mental health at work also exacerbate mental health problems. So you're likely to feel, musculoskeletal problems. So you're likely to feel more pain if you're feeling a bit depressed as well. So you can actually, through good management practices of promoting health and well-being at work, improve performance through reductions in musculoskeletal problems to some degree, but this is mainly through mental health. I mentioned earlier about presenteeism. So as well as reducing your costs of absence and presenteeism, for people who do slip through the net, and you can't prevent ill health in the workplace through management practices, no matter how good your management practices and how comprehensive the health and well-being offering is, because people will do things out of work, or things will happen to them out of work which will have knock-on effects on their mental health, and there's nothing you can do about that. So what you can do is have those management practices that, and this is particularly around that help for struggling workers, that enable people to return to work more quickly. And I did mention that not all presenteeism is bad. We do know for people with returning to work with things like depression, the return to work is quicker if you, or more sustainable if you can get people back to work quicker. And we also know it's better to be at work if you're depressed rather than to go off on sick. So if you can, through good management practices, and this includes line management practices about kind of making those adjustments and accommodations for when people are struggling, keep people in work, that presenteeism, yes, you are going to get a performance deficit, but it's not going to be as bad as if those people are on 6 months sick leave and you have to get temps in to cover that haven't got the same kind of level of experience and knowledge and skills. I'd say this kind of practice works in any environment, but obviously more noticeable for larger organisations because the higher absence and sickness rates. And again, given all the evidence that kind of depression and anxiety in the working adult population can be made worse by poor management practices, are bigger around those big three of job quality, management practices, and social relationships at work. The next we go through, so that's for many people the obvious one. Absence is a starting place. The other route is it's around social exchange. So humans, as we're social animals, we have a norm of reciprocity. So if someone helps us, we're kind of hardwired to help them. Now there are variations here, but generally we build trusting social relationships with other people through reciprocating small favours, and these small favours build up. So again, the idea here, and there is evidence this works, and we've been doing work in this area ourselves, is that if you offer good work, especially around kind of good, interesting work, then people get a well-being increment. You know, they feel a bit better about the work that they do, and they respond through having that good work through the normal reciprocity with extra effort and commitment. So the idea here is, like, if you look after your people, they will look after you, I suppose is the mantra you hear in some management circles. And as well as extra effort and commitment, this also minimises turnover. People feel more stronger identity with the organisation because the organisation is investing in them in some way, and stronger commitment to the organisation, of course. And they're less likely to be motivated not to turn up for work because it happens to be a Monday morning and they really don't feel like getting out of bed. So this kind of non-sickness absence, which is just sometimes passed off as absence, depending on how organisations manage their absence, but most organisations will take a couple of days without having to certify in any way, and that enables people to, if they don't like their work, to avoid work by not turning up to work. And again, this seems to work for any organisation in any environment. just offer good work, and people will respond with that effort and commitment. Of course, it's worth saying the counter applies. If you stop offering good work, then don't be surprised if the level of commitment falls off and your turnover goes through the roof. I mean your staff turnover, not your financial turnover. Linked very closely in some ways is another social process, and this is one in which some people have put forward as the explanation why you get these accumulating effects. This idea that you get a stronger relationship at organisational or unit level between wellbeing and performance. It's quite a simple one, basically. People are in a good mood are nicer people. They're more pro-social. And the reasons for this are multiple, but one of those is if you're in a good mood, that's a signal to you that everything's going okay. You don't have to really be too worried about your own concerns, and that means you can just be worried about other people's concern and help people more. So the idea here is pro-social behaviour is you're more likely to engage in organisational citizenship, which is essentially going the extra mile. So going beyond your job description, helping your colleagues, working a little bit harder beyond what you're expected to do, doing that extra task, that kind of thing. Now, most people do this most of the time anyway. So we have a natural tendency to, our organisations treating us quite well to do this. But of course, any of you that I studied employment relations, like I have to some degree, know that one of the first strategies that a trade union will use in industrial action is work to run, and that's basically saying we're going to stop the organisational citizenship. So it's an effective strategy, and also if people start being organisational or are seen to be good organisational citizens, this is role modelling, and other people pick that up as well. So this might lead to these accumulating effects that you see. Now we get moving into other areas which are more specifically seen in complex system environments, and especially where some level of creativity or innovation is concerned, like for example in design engineering, and after a number of years studying problem solving and learning in design engineering, because it's a great environment to look at decision making, creativity and innovation, because design engineers have to do that. It's part of the job. And there are a number of ways that well-being could be linked to enhanced creativity and problem solving. The first is that positive mood stimulates creative thinking. And the idea here is, again, we go back to, if you're in a good mood, that's a signal to you that everything's going good. You don't have to be worried about specific concerns. And because of that, you can devote your time, your thinking space over to thinking about imagining worlds that could be. Imagine, creative thinking, basically. This is called divergent thinking by psychologists. So the idea is that you start looking at different possibilities. You start bringing different concepts together and putting together in new ways, and that links to the creativity, seeing things differently. Closely related to this, and this is very much around people using skills at work, making decisions, their own decisions around work, that kind of motivation, that also stimulates creativity. So very, very similar processes as well. And in relation to that job design, where people have the requirements to be creative, whether it's through a continuous improvement process and problem solving, or they are in a creative industry or creative role, then it's really important that people have the ability to use their skills and take decisions about that. Otherwise, the requirements to be creative are lessened in their effects. But if you have that ability to take decisions and use your skills, then those requirements are enhanced in their impact on creativity and problem solving. So creativity and problem solving is the example of where you can see well-being leading to performance, but also where things that lead to well-being can also lead to performance, because people have to solve problems because it's part of their job. Okay. And I kind of mentioned the motivation link and creativity already, but I want to unpack that a little bit more. So essentially the idea here is good work is motivating work, and I mentioned before, good work involves as much job security as you can, skill use and development, the ability to take decisions that affect your work, decent work-life balance, good social climate, relationships at work, being managed, people managed in the right way, and understanding what your role is. And we know from this is one of the most well-researched kind of models and ways of thinking in the area of research that I'm engaged in, and there's just consistent effort, more creativity, more commitment, less absence, less staff turnover, and those kind of things. All those things create better performance, which then should link onto better creativity as well. Now, the reason why this happens is that motivating work is basically meets our fundamental human needs. And these have been boiled down to social contact, competence, and self-direction, amongst other things. So it kind of addresses what our fundamental concerns of which come out in different ways in different people, but these are the underlying things that motivate most people in one way or another. And the final aspect in specific route I want to look at is around learning, and this is especially linked to decision latitude, the ability to take decisions that affect your work, and to an extent social support as well, good social relations. You can ask people for advice, and if you come across a problem at work, if you can take decisions about how you solve that problem, and you've got a bit of advice how to solve that problem as well, this leads to learning. This learning will lead to continuous improvement, because the next time you see a similar problem, you know what to do. At the same time, problem solving can be quite distressing if you don't know what the answer to the problem is. But if you can figure out what to do, this enables you to kind of self-manage your work demands. You get more confident about self-managing your work demands as well. So the felt confidence from learning new things, but also that you can sort of have some impact on your work environment and things where you can cope with those problems, both lead to well-being. And the example that I give here, so this is especially important for any continuous improvement processes which is based on learning, complex systems which are more likely to require continuous improvement or more likely to throw up problems, and of course innovation. And the example I'd like to give my students is Toyota's andon cord. So anyone can stop the production line when they see a problem. So anyone, doesn't have to be a line manager, pull the andon cord, production line stops, you try and solve the problem, the thing that stopped, was causing the problem with the production line, and what's even better is all your mates come and help you solve that problem, and therefore you get this communal learning going on at the same time. Makes Toyota a good place to work, also makes Toyota very good at producing very good and reliable motor cars, so much so that everybody has to have something like the Toyota production system in advanced manufacturing. So kind of bringing it all together, though, is these different reasons, these different hypotheses interlock and reinforce each other. So this is the other argument why you get these kind of accumulating effects at organisation and unit level. So you get the motivation and the opportunity and the ability. We call it the Amer Model: ability, motivation, and opportunity. And again, if you think about it, the last thing you would like in when you've got expensive pieces of kit in a robotic production line is to have highly motivated people with lots of opportunity to take decisions running around without any ability, because they're going to take the wrong decisions. So everything has to interlock. People have to know what to do, know how to solve problems, feel confident to solve problems, have the opportunity to use their skills, and obviously be motivated to do. So it's all kind of integrated. And we call these high performance work systems. So you have your job design so that people can take decisions, so that they can use their skills, reasonable kind of work demands. You don't want to overload people, but you need those supporting human resource management practices around development, so as people develop their skills. As they develop their skills, they can progress, so that makes job security and pay, and interestingly, performance management. So some people go, oh, we don't want performance management, we don't want performance appraisal. It's a great time to if you've done properly, talk to your manager, but also sets the expectations and clarity on what it is that you're meant to achieve. So that kind of clarity itself is motivating. So the interlocking systems go together. So to bring this all together and some sort of close now, that's a quote from one of the studies I was involved with, which looked at the introduction of these high-performance work systems in a high safety-critical, high-hazard manufacturing plant. So basically, one of the guys on the production line on the shop floor was saying, "I'm busier, but I'm also learning more." So, got the well-being benefits from that, made the work a lot more interesting for him. So what we do find, and the evidence indicates, that high performance working practices, these systems, confer productivity gains across all sectors. However, the evidence indicates they're differentially effective in advanced manufacturing, so much more important in an advanced manufacturing environment. And we'd go further than that, actually, and say, well, advanced manufacturing is a sector where you see continuous improvement processes, and lean, where you're expecting people to solve problems and minimize waste, complex systems where things go wrong. So these robots break, who's going to fix the robots? Well, I've heard people say they know you're going to get robots to fix robots, but who's going to program the robots to fix the robots? So the more complex the systems, the more uncertainty that can be created, and this is most effectively managed where the problem occurs. So having workers that are confident and able to solve problems as they occur, make that problem solving faster. They're happier because they've got more interesting work. Hopefully there's a wider wellbeing program supporting them as well, but they're more productive, and the organisation is more productive because you don't have a long chain of command where people are going back and forwards seeking permission to do things, but because people are empowered, have the confidence and the skills to manage the complexity at source. So as the conclusion I would have is wellbeing and productivity are not antithetical. If you've got effective management practices, especially in complex environments, they are mutually reinforcing. So I'll leave it there. Happy to take any questions, but there's a few resources there that you might be interested in following up if you want to. So I'm happy to take questions now. I'll turn my screen off. There we go.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. So yes, if people have questions, please do post them in the chat or raise your hand and come on mic. We've got one hand up already. Chris?
Yeah, thanks, Fiona. Kevin, thanks very much. You can hear me, can you?
Yeah.
So an interesting one, because the decision-making thing is fascinating from my perspective, where you've got engineering companies struggling with quality assurance and whether, allowing decision-making amongst the workforce threatens that. I think robots are one thing, but what artificial intelligence for me is a classic example of somewhere where technology is going and the scope of AI is not clear. So you've got the lunatic fringe in Silicon Valley for whom everything is going to be done by the AI, and actually you've got some really clever often military research around workload management, where the AI is very subtle and only intervenes at certain moments. So how does your high productivity work system, how is it addressing AI?
That's a really interesting question. To the extent a lot of the research, of course, lags technological advances, and this is the thing that as you know, I make stuff for full of engineers. Engineers design something, and then the Spitfire was a great example. Terrible to fly if you're flying one for the first time because of how it was designed, the cockpit design. It wasn't designed with a naive pilot in mind. So there's an element of design, and you mentioned the lunatic fringe, where you actually need to think about how you engage with the end user and the person using the productivity. I'll come to the point about quality assurance, and I'll make another point about AI in particular. So as you'll know, in construction, you see a lot of these QA processes which people have to comply with. But in construction, which is high hazard, you also see continuous improvement. You also see, people being empowered to say, well, actually, a safer way of doing that is this way. So we're not sticking to the the script itself. So I did a bit of work in nuclear civil nuclear engineering design, and you've got more faster solutions to problems where people were empowered to make those decisions on the same, and these design engineers were minimum masters, mostly PhD educated, so they were highly skilled, so could exercise that discretion. So there's a point about skills is really, really important, so people can exercise the discretion. The thing about AIs, I think you would probably need someone with some sort of oversight to sort of intervene with the AI. So it's nice to have AI to intervene. So actually, I think that person's been feeling a bit tired now. So we'll give them a nudge, or we'll make sure the robot gets a bit closer to help them. That's good. But I was hearing a story about this machine learning selection program. So the idea was thousands of applicants for positions. So they've got a bit of AI in to sift the applicants, and the AI. There was a very minor association, small association between gender and ability to perform the job. So some competence to perform the job was slightly associated with gender. I'm not sure what it was, but an example would be if the typical one is carrying bricks. Blokes are not likely to be better because they tend to be stronger. Fine motor work, where it's wiring. That women are likely to be better because they tend to have smaller fingers. So, but selecting on the basis of gender, of course, is illegal. But what this machine, because the machine didn't know the law, had learned that basically, if you select out all the women quickly, you have a slightly better pool of applicants. So the AI was basically doing something which we would regard as unethical and illegal. So someone had to be in there to intervene. And I think this is where you will need skilled operators to look at how the AI is doing things and to say, well, actually, is the AI going into some sort of area we don't want it to go into? And then sort of overriding the AI. So I think that the notion of having discretion and skills, I mean, very, very highly skilled work. So talking about very, very highly skilled engineers, I would guess normally having those intervention processes. But you can see when my brother-in-law works in a firm in Northern Ireland where they use CAD/CAM sort of things, and you can imagine a point where you would get people who are sort of less skilled onto apprenticeships, working very closely with AI and working very closely with robots and they do their own robotic programming with the guys that are sort of joined straight from school, but being more skilled to intervene with those things. So I think possibly you're looking at longer apprenticeships, longer training periods, so that people can cope with that complexity. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's good. Yeah.
Okay, I've got a question for you, Kevin. You mentioned job quality, and I just wondered how you assess that, because it just seemed like quite a subjective sort of measure, if you like, because what I might think is a good quality job, you might think is a terrible job, or vice versa. So I just wondered how you assess, and of course there's a wide range of jobs as well. So how do you go about
well, there are multiple theoretical traditions here. So there's the kind of employment relations tradition, which is very much based on essentially what does a good job look like from the point of view of a good society. So it's much more sociological in its conception. And then there's the kind of psychological, kind of medical tradition, which what kind of job features are related to poor quality mental health in the workplace. And both traditions, intellectually, they hardly speak to each other, but both traditions converge on similar sorts of things. So things like job security, decision latitude, reasonable work-life balance, social relationships at work, they all have predictive power for development of future mental health conditions, skill use and decision latitude, even predicts onset of things like Alzheimer's, which is a growing area of research. Also ischemic heart disease. So there's a large body of evidence, both, I mean, very, very large scale, multiple epidemiological studies from multiple countries across a range of different health indicators, depression, anxiety, suicide, whatever, converge on what people from the employment relations tradition would say, you know, this is what makes up a high quality job if we talk to, you know, workers. So it is quite amazing, really, the consistency across these different research traditions. And it's one of the things we've looked at in our own research, because it's quite an interesting question about, well, what makes this a good job for me but not for you?
Yeah.
And what we find is, again, we find this consistency, and there are these things that are consistently linked. How they might manifest themselves for any particular individual, because they are quite abstract concepts, might be different, and they'll require management. But a lot of what, you know, again, in sort of good management practice is actually kind of figuring out, well, what kind of delegation does that person want, and what kind of delegation does that person want? What kind of skills has that person got, and what kind of skills has that person got? And a lot of it boils down to, and I didn't mention this in high performance work systems, having a decent quality selection process, so you get the people who, you know, who fit the job, as it were. So, but no, it's subjective. Yeah, but it's very intersubjective, to use a technical term. You know, so much so that it's kind of a you know, it's not quite objective in the true sense, but it's close enough. It's objective enough for epidemiologists to believe.
Wow, that's impressive. Okay, great, thank you. Have we got any other questions from the audience? Do feel free to put your hand up and come on mic. Can't see any hands gone up.
We are coming to the hour.
Yep. Okay, well, in that case then, we'll draw it to a close. I just would like to say a really big thank you to Kevin for a really fascinating talk. Covered a lot of different ground there, and certainly lots to chew over for how we think about work and our productivity and well-being in the workplace. So thank you very much. So all the seminars will be available online. So if you've missed any or want to rewatch any or forward to me, do feel free to do that. And do enjoy your evening. It looks beautiful out there, so looking forward to getting outside and enjoying the sunshine this evening. We're taking a short break from these seminars over the summer months, but we will be back in the autumn with some more seminars then. So we look forward to seeing you. Do monitor our social media channels to learn when the next seminars will be and what topics they'll be on. So enjoy the summer and look forward to seeing you all at the series in the autumn. Thanks everybody, and thank you especially to Kevin.